if we have some problems, you stop me. Okay? So today we will speak about glutamate. I told you maybe this is better to start with this one because first, this is one of the main important neurotransmitter in the brain and spinal cord. And second, the organization of this lecture is quite something like I would like you to produce because the organization follows the guidelines. So, starting with glutamate, so I told you this is one of the main neurotransmitters in the brain. It is present in food, by the way, and you know that, so it depends. You have a lot in Parmesan, cheese, very few in mushroom or chicken, beef. This is not that big. And so it depends a little bit. In the brain, you have something like 5 to 15 millimole per kilogram, which approximately corresponds to 2.3 grams of glutamate in the brain. So glutamate here is an amino acid. And what you should realize here is that glutamate enters also the metabolism, of course, because this is an amino acid. It can enter in the proteins and a lot of different metabolic pathways. And the concentration of glutamate are completely different depending on the compartment where you are. In the cell or SCSF, you have few micromolar. Inside cells, you have in between 1 and 10 millimolar, and in the synaptic cleft, it can go to millimolar, even more, which is removed in milliseconds. And we will see how it is organized, but and this is quite complicated. What is the functional role of glutamate? Oh, of course, because this is an executive system, it will enter in a lot of different functions in the brain and spinal cord. And we raise the concept of tripartite synapses, which means that there is a partnership between the pre-element, the presynaptic neuron, trying to use my both arms, my two arms, yes, presynaptic neurons here, at terminals, so the presynaptic terminal, the postsynaptic terminal, and the main role of astrocytes, and more generally, glial cells. So the functional role of glutamate is the fast excitatory transmission in the CNS. It is involved, I mean, its efficacy is modified according to specific condition, and there is a plasticity phenomenon implying that the glutamatergic synapses can be modulated in their efficacy. It is involved in cognitive functions. In terms of metabolic functions, it is involved in energy production, ammonia detoxification, protein synthesis, and this is the precursor of GABA using glutamic acid decarboxylase. So this is fundamental roles. But don't forget, first, fast excitatory transmission in the CNS, and second, metabolic function. You have the two. In terms of physiology, It is involved in motor control. So think about the projection of the motor cortex to the spinal cord. This is glutamate. This is involved in learning and memory. We don't know exactly how it works, but at the end, you have the souvenir of something. And this is perhaps linked to modification of synapses, the force of synapses, with phenomena that you know, such as long-term potentiation or long-term depression, without, opposed them, without opposing them, because you can have better memory with LTD. It is involved in pain. I told you last week that in the dorsal root of the spinal cord, you have some cells that are projecting to the spinal cord, and the main neurotransmitter is glutamate. And in your food, you can have some taste, which is a taste of umami, and umami corresponds to sodium glutamate. In terms of pathophysiology, we have a lot. And starting by the glutamate hypothesis of schizophrenia. So it means here that we would have cortical defect of some neurons projecting to the subcortical areas, and all these neurons are glutamatergic. It is also involved in epilepsy, epilepsy being abnormal excitability of the tissue, and usually glutamate can promote this kind of abnormal excitability. And it has been reported in some disease where, for instance, a glutamate decarboxylase, no, I don't remember, D1 mutation leading to some overactivity of glutamate system. This is also involved in Huntington disease because we have some lesion of cortical neurons projecting to the striatum. Alzheimer's disease, and in parentheses, you have the name of one drug that is used to correct a little bit the cognitive dysfunction in Alzheimer's disease. This is memantine, and memantine is a non-selective blocker of NMDA receptors. It is also involved in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. Again, we don't have wonderful treatment, but there is some amelioration with riluzole, which I think, if I remember correctly, inhibits some transporter for glutamate. And it is involved in ischemic stroke. So ischemic means that the tissue has low oxygen, so it leads to no ATP, so the ion pumps stop working, and the consequence is the transporters are working in the reverse way. So back to the last week, with classical neurotransmitters like glutamate, you can have some non-exocytotic release involving the transporters. And the problem is that if the ischemia is too long, the release of glutamate through those transporters can be sustained, leading to excitotoxicity, which is shown here on the slide called pathophysiology. So you have the presynaptic terminal with glutamate, the pump for glutamate, so which are on neurons, but which are also on astrocytes. In a normal situation, glutamate in the extracellular space is reuptake by those pumps. In injury or disease situations, then the transporter can go in the reverse way because the energy failure associated with the decrease in ATP lead to reverse the function of these transporters. So the pathophysiology, it is continuing with neuropathic pain. So neuropathic pain is complicated because I spoke about a little bit morphine, but it looks like this is not really good. So you have other strategies now. Other strategies, and maybe glutamate antagonist or NMDA antagonist, and maybe also polyamines that are binding on NMDA receptors and that limit the activity of NMDA receptors. So the search continues. In Parkinsonisms and Parkinson's disease, we have evidence that it could be interesting, but indirect evidence, because you know that with L-DOPA is really good for motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease, but after long-term administration, maybe 2 to 5 years, Parkinson patients develop abnormal movement. Could be some sort of dystonia, but the main problem being the dyskinesia. And then one compound, amantadine, can limit the dyskinesia induced by L-DOPA, and amantadine is a non-selective blocker of NMDA receptors. Memantine is not used in this case, and other NMDA antagonists are not used as well, such as ketamine, but ketamine has some, of course, some side effects like hallucination and psychosis, so it is not good. Maybe we could also look at some NMDA antagonists in case of depression and anxiety. For instance, it has been proposed that ketamine could be efficacious in the treatment of depression, I think 5 or 6 years ago. The problem is, again, it's difficult to prescribe ketamine in clinical settings because ketamine has side effects. Also, in drug addiction, it has been shown that glutamate transmission was altered. So maybe there could be possibilities to transmission, multiple sclerosis, etc. So glutamate can be several diseases because this is at the basis of executive systems and present almost everywhere. But maybe this is a problem. If we are modulating glutamate transmission, we might have some big side effects. So so you have to understand this. It can be good, but the side effects will be important. But maybe through a better knowledge of the different receptors involved in transmission, maybe those receptors are not distributed equivalently in the brain, so maybe we could specifically act in some specific part of the brain or the spinal cord. This is a possibility, so maybe you could look at this course through this angle. And you will see that we have some different receptors for glutamate, including metabotropic receptors, and some drugs targeting those metabotropic receptors have been pushed in clinic. Nowadays, I'm not sure they reach the authorization to use, or if they have been marketed. Maybe for mGluR5, I don't know, I'm not sure. But at least a better knowledge of glutamate transmission might help to be more specific of some disease. So to fight against the disease without inducing big side effects. So let's switch to the description of the system, starting by the distribution. So I told you almost everywhere, and here you have some example of the distribution of the glutamatergic fibers, corticocortical, which are glutamatergic, thalamocortical or corticothalamic projection in both ways. And these are glutamatergic neurons. Then the projection from the cortex to the basal ganglia, which gives the so-called but not really good extrapyramidal pathway system, not pathway, system. So you have mainly the projection of the cortex to the striatum, but you have also the projection from the cortex to the substantia nigra, cortex to the subthalamic nucleus, and you have also subthalamic nucleus, which is a nucleus composed exclusively by glutamatergic cells. So the subthalamic nucleus is projecting to the cortex, to the substantia nigra, to the pallidum, and to other targets. Anyway, at the end, I can tell you that somehow glutamate is everywhere. And don't forget also the projection from the cortex to the spinal cord. The biosynthesis. So this is required, for instance, the enzymatic pathway to understand how glutamate is produced. And here is one main important point of this lecture. It definitely needs glutamine. So you have the citric acid cycle. Maybe known also, I don't know how you were taught with this, but the cycle of Krebs. And from this and ketoglutarate acid, you can have glutamate. So either glutamate stay in the citric acid cycle, depending on the concentration of glutamate in the cytosol. And the concentration of glutamate in the cytosol of astrocyte is around 2 millimolar. Then, if it goes a little bit higher, it promotes more the formation of glutamine. This is transamination. And then glutamine, if the concentration is too high, can go in the blood through astrocyte feet, like you want, or be released in the extracellular space and reach the presynaptic glutamatergic terminals. So here, this step is essential because glutamate by itself normally cannot cross by itself cannot be released by astrocyte. So it needs the step of glutamine. So it cannot cross, and if you look at the concentration in the extracellular space, this is around 1 micromolar. This is not below 1 micromolar, I guess, but around. When I did some microdialysis experiment, my extracellular concentration was similar to other researcher and around 5 micromolar. But still, this is obviously extremely low, 1,000 times lower compared to the concentration of glutamate inside astrocyte. So interesting to see the difference of concentration of a compound depending on the compartment. Then, glutamine is reaching the synapse, the presynaptic synapse, and then is converted into glutamate. So the concentration of glutamate here is something, I don't know, something like 1 to 10 millimolar. And then it is concentrated inside vesicles, and it can reach more than 100 millimolar, specifically in vesicles of exocytosis. Thus, you can understand that when glutamate is released, this is extremely powerful, and in the synapse here, which is a small compartment, a small volume in the synaptic cleft, you have transiently very high concentration of glutamate, estimated to be around 1 millimolar, and then clean extremely rapidly, and you can see again the micromolar concentration of glutamate in the extracellular space. So this is cleaned thanks to the excitatory amino acid transporters, at least. And in the postsynaptic element, so postsynaptic cells express transporter for glutamate, so can reuptake glutamate, and the concentration would be around 10 millimolar. So they can reuptake glutamate, but they can also produce glutamate, still due to the citric acid cycle. So in terms of the enzymes involved in the production of glutamate, here you have the citric acid cycle with alpha ketoglutarate, and you have the glutamate dehydrogenase, which can work in both ways depending on the concentration of the compounds. And it needs the cofactor NAD. Then you can have glutamate, which with glutaminase, which glutamine synthetic. It's difficult in English for me. And with an ATP-dependent mechanism, you produce glutamine. Glutamine, if the concentration is too high, can give back glutamate with glutaminase, and in presynaptic glutamatergic terminals, glutamine is converted into glutamate by glutaminase. So you see here that this is, as evoked before, also a way to ammonium detoxification in both cases, for both reactions. Then, okay, glutamate is involved in, is a neurotransmitter, but also in the citric acid cycle, the production of glutamine and the production of glutathione, production of polyamines, production of urea, and production of GABA. This is extremely diverse. And in each case, it depends on equilibrium of concentration. So the enzymes and the transporters. So maybe this is one of the most regulated compound in the brain. Okay, we can discuss about that, but at least it is extremely regulated. And then glutamine, which can give glutamate, etc., can also give rise to amino sugars, glucoproteins, and nucleotides. So this is wonderful that the living use glutamate as a neurotransmitter, but you see that this is quite complicated. Think about all the enzymes, the equilibrium, the transporters. You have many transporters. So I think this is fascinating in terms of metabolic pathways. And I would love to have time to look with scrutiny, all the enzymes and the Km, constant of Michaelis, to generate all these pathways. So you have probably a strong equilibrium. So the storage. As I told you, for classical neurotransmitters, you have one difficulty. the neurotransmitter is produced in the cytosol because the enzymes are there. Glutaminase is in the cytosol. And then the issue is to have some transporters capable of transporting the neurotransmitter to inside, I mean, the vesicles of exocytosis. And here we don't have only one vesicular transporter, we have three. And this is a little bit weird between you and me. This is a little bit weird, and I will explain to you this. So we have VGLUT1, VGLUT2, and VGLUT3. VGLUT1 and VGLUT2 are expressed quite complementary. So you have the distribution in red of VGLUT1. VGLUT1 is found in the cortex. Good, because you have a lot of glutamate there. In the hippocampus or dendrite gyrus, anyway. And here the basolateral nucleus of amygdala. So the main structures, but it is also expressed somewhere else. VGLUT2 in blue is expressed, for instance, in a little bit in the cortex, especially the fourth layer. And the fourth layer, yes, okay. In the thalamus, in the amygdala also, and in the hypothalamus. Then VGLUT3, it is expressed in layer 2 of the cortex, a little bit in other cortical layers, a little bit in hippocampus, and I will extend this distribution for all these vesicular transporters. The issue here is that VGLUT1 and VGLUT2 are normally expressed by glutamatergic neurons. VGLUT3 can be expressed by GABAergic interneurons, astrocytes, serotonin cells, and acetylcholine cells. Not all of them, but some of them. So, the distribution of the mRNA. VGLUT1, as we saw in the cortex, also in the cerebellum. And still, you have the complementary element between VGLUT2 and VGLUT2, sorry, mainly in the brainstem, and VGLUT1, telencephalon and cerebellum. Okay? And when you look at VGLUT3, more confidential, not necessarily expressed by glutamatergic cells, but here interneurons and cholinergic interneurons. You have also here expression of VGLUT3 in some pontic regions, so pontic or mesencephalic region. Here this is the Raphe nuclei with serotonin cells, and here also. And probably that the blue dots you can see in the cortex corresponds to GABAergic interneurons or some astrocytes. So this is complicated. And when these El-Mestikawi looked at the co-expression of VGLUT1 or 2 with other vesicular transporters, they found in pink here a correspondence between VGLUT3 and VMAT2. And VMAT2, we will see that it corresponds to the vesicular transporters of monoamines. And in that case, this is probably serotonin. VGLUT3 and vesicular transporter for inhibitory amino acid such as GABA in blue. So it means that you have some interneurons there which are expressing VGLUT3. In blue, green here, this is a correspondence between VGLUT3 and VCAT. VCAT, this is a vesicular transporter for acetylcholine. And we have in the nucleus accumbens the correspondence between VGLUT2 and VMAT2, which means here that somehow some cells of the mesencephalon express VGLUT2 mRNA and VMAT2 and then project to the nucleus accumbens. So I cannot tell you what kind of cells, perhaps dopamine cells from the tegmental ventral area combined with, I don't know, probably some dopaminergic cells from the ventral tegmental area projecting specifically to the nucleus accumbens. So this is not easy, but in each case, you have a distinct distribution. So do we have, can we imagine a release of glutamate by dopaminergic cells? The answer is yes. Can we imagine glutamate release by serotonin cells? The answer is yes. Or glutamate release by cholinergic cells? The answer is also yes, but maybe this is not the main effect because I have some doubt that it will really be important. I think it will be in the background of glutamatergic transmission because you won't reach only with those neuromodulatory systems millimolar concentration at the synapse. But it has been proposed by El-Mestikawi that maybe the co-expression of VCAT or acetylcholine transporter and the glutamate, the vesicular transporter, could allow us to change the concentration of acetylcholine. And probably it would enhance the concentration of acetylcholine inside the vesicle. But still, we don't exactly know what it means. So, if you go back on my previous lecture when I said in the distribution that neuropeptides can colocalize with classical neurotransmitter, be aware that in case of classical neurotransmitters, you can have also colocalization. And this slide is a very good example to argue for this, because on the same vesicle or in the same neurons, not sure the same vesicle, but we don't know, at least on the same neurons, you have the vesicular transporter for two distinct classical neurotransmitters. So the next slide, the release. So the release is mainly exocytotic with different modalities of action. So you can have synchronous or phasic release. I mean, coupled to incoming action potential. It can be asynchronous release, so a delay compared to the action potential. And it can be also a spontaneous or tonic release, independent of action potential, but still exocytotic. So for one reason, you have a small raise in calcium or simply the movement of protein involved in exocytotic release for the vesicles, and then you have this kind of spontaneous or tonic release, which usually is very low. It maintains a little bit some, I don't know, extracellular levels, but this is very low. Still, it occurs. By the way, you have also vesicles in, I mean, not that concentrated, but you have some few vesicles in astrocytes, and you can have a sort of release of glutamate from astrocytes as well. And then, so you have the exocytotic release, and you have also the non-exocytotic release, as I evoked before in case of ischemic injury. So the exocytosis, or you may know this different pathway. Honestly, I don't. I don't. Please understand that I don't exactly know the interaction between the proteins involved in this complicated cascade at the presynaptic zone. Be aware that this is a cycle from the filling of vesicles to the fusion to the plasmic membrane, and then to give back a vesicle with specific markers. So this is a complicated mechanism involving a lot of protein, some of them being essential because they are calcium sensing proteins. So in a simplified way, I prefer this. So you have calcium, which here can enter the cell through specific transporters, but it can also come from the organelles, such as mitochondria. So you have the small synaptic vesicle with some key proteins, VAMP2, synaptotagmin, which is one important calcium sensing protein, and then the fusion with syntaxine or SNAP25, and also other proteins. And this mechanism is involved in synchronous phasic release, asynchronous release, and spontaneous tonic release. So exocytotic release. The non-exocytotic release is also complicated, because I told you that you have some transporter, and normally this is the point 7 of this lecture, the inactivation. Inactivation, but still, if we have an increase in glutamate in the extracellular space, we can address the origin. And this is not always the exocytosis. This is sometimes due to the reversal function of some transporters. Some transporters, which are the first one, the EAAT, the point 7, and the EAAT is excitatory amino acid transporters. And I think you have 4 distinct EAAT. So it allows normally the reuptake of glutamate, okay? But in case of, in some specific conditions, glutamate can be released by these transporters through, can be released to, the extracellular space. But you have also other proteins, VRAC, which can be involved in some connexin, gap junction. In that case, you can have VRAC involvement and release of glutamate by astrocytes. You can also have P2X7. You will be expert in P2X7 because there is a work on purines, and P2X7 is a channel receptor for purines. And the channel can also allow for the entry or output of glutamate. So this is a little bit crazy, and some emit channels as well. You have also the XCT antiporter. So the astrocytes, can release glutamate through these transporters, and this is non-exocytotic. It does not depend on glutamate. So usually it is related to ATP, but I skip this step, the B cartoon. The target. So the target is a big issue concerning glutamatergic transmission. You have the ionotropic receptor and the metabotropic receptors. In the ionotropic receptors, you have at least 3 distinct receptors: the NMDA receptors, the AMPA receptors, and the kainate receptors. It depends on the subunits that are composing the receptors. And for metabotropic glutamate receptors, mGlu-R, you have 8 receptors in total, distributed in 3 distinct groups, 1, 2, and 3. So this is a complex family. Of course, the ionotropic receptors, I think you know them. They allow for the entry of positive charge, so sodium and calcium, all of them. And you have the AMPA receptors composed by subunits GLU-R1 to 4, the kainate receptors composed by the subunits GLU-R5 to 7 or and kainate 1, kainate 2, and the NMDA receptors composed by NR1 and NR2A to D subunits. So the efficacy of the channel, etc., I don't really know whether it's. Yes, you have some. We are starting to have some specific pharmacology depending on the subunit, but you see that they were called like this, AMPA, kainate, and NMDA, simply because they were reacting distinct presence of the molecule, kainate, the molecule, and NMDA, the molecule. So NMDA did not alter AMPA receptors or kainate receptors. So 3 big family. And then we saw that the composition was a little bit different, so that now we are starting to have some specific pharmacology depending on the subunits composing the receptor. One particularity for NMDA is that you have a block of magnesium that has to be removed, and it is removed usually by a small depolarization. So this is one reason why NMDA receptors are closely related to AMPA receptors or kainate receptors, because the first depolarization induced by the former will activate the NMDA receptor. After that, you have the metabotropic glutamate receptor. And here, for a reason that I don't really understand, the extra cellular domain of metabotropic glutamatergic receptor is quite huge. So usually, seven transmembrane receptor have something like 400 amino acids, and those metabotropic glutamate receptors maybe reach something like 700 or 800 amino acids. So this is quite huge. And they function as dimers. So next slide is only for you to understand that we had different receptors, as I told you, different ionotropic receptors. For instance, here, these are horizontal cells, one which have been called H2 and the other one H3. Okay? And this this cell is respond to glutamate. H2 responds to glutamate, a lot to kainate, a little bit to AMPA, and or quisqualat, and absolutely not to NMDA. And please note that it also it also responds to the application of glycine, which is required to the activation of NMDA receptors. And in this case, H3, glycine is not efficacious, glutamate is little bit efficacious, but still we keep kainate as the main effect. So here we have probably a combination of kainate and glycine, kainate and NMDA receptors. Do we have ligands? Yes. In the upper part, glutamate, of course, NMDA, quisqualat, kainate, AMPA, and those which, and DAP5, for instance, which is quite new and quite used now because of the better selectivity. Then we have some drugs that you may know, quinurenic acid, which is an antagonist, NBQX, an antagonist, trans-ACPD, which is a compound that will block that will block excitatory amino acid transporters. And we have also other compounds. So some of them are quite selective, NBQX, and the other one is CNQX. I'm not sure it is represented here. No. Okay. So they are not always selective. So for the ionotropic receptor ligands, we family, NMDA, AMPA, kainate. The agonist, of course, you have NMDA here, and the one with, this is a modification of glycine. For AMPA receptors, you have AMPA, quisqualat, kainate, this one, LY something, which is not directly an agonist, but which is more a positive allosteric modulator. So it will favor the efficacy of glutamate or some agonist. And for kainate, you have kainate and other compounds, but you will see that between AMPA and kainate, you have some overlap. And for antagonists, we have AP5, AP7. I think AP5 is quite selective. Memantine, which is absolutely not selective, and MK801, which is a channel blocker, while memantine is a channel blocker, but it stays inside the channel. So it is a strong channel blocker, while memantine is a moderate channel blocker. So, and these ones, you see, we are starting to be more selective for some specific subunits. For instance, NR2A to B, glue NR2A, glue NR to CD, or glue NR to B. So for AMPA, we have NBQX, CNQX, DNQX. Classically, in the publication, you will see those compounds. They are not used in clinic as far as I know. And you have also other compounds that I don't know if they are selective or not. And for kinates, you compounds, I don't know if they are the NS compound or G compound are next, and then limiting the channel. So, in case of ionotropic receptors, they are here. No, forget A and look at here this picture where the presynaptic terminal show you the vesicles containing glutamate, the release of glutamate in the extracellular space, and the binding of glutamate of some ionotropic receptors, which are AMPA, can be sometimes kainate, and NMDA receptors. Usually, you have the opening of AMPA receptors, and thereafter, the opening of NMDA receptors. So on this cartoon here, you can have also the expression of transporters and the expression, the presence of metabotropic glutamatergic receptors. So if we go back on A, on the left side, this is weird because it tells you that you can have some ionotropic receptors expressed by presynaptic terminals, and indeed, you can. Does it mean that they are autoreceptors? I mean, we could say this, which means that could be also excitatory of ionotropic receptors has been well described tissues. For instance, fibers coming from the thalamus and projecting to the striatum are expressing at terminals NMDA receptors. What does it mean? I don't know, but this is the situation. The distribution of glutamate receptor, I mean ionotropic glutamate receptors, is a little bit different, but there are some overlap, as you can imagine, with AMPA and NMDA receptors. So we can do in situ hybridization, and here with radio-labeled probes, where you can see a specific distribution in, I think this is a Downdet gyrus, and the hippocampus here. Also a huge in the while in other brain regions this is confidential. Does not mean that they are not there. They are there, but less concentrated hippocampus. For instance, here you have the situation with the entorhinal cortex, the subicular